Hello, everyone. I am Rose, and this is the Rise with Rose show. And today I'm interviewing Matthew Ashdown. He is a gene key expert and someone I met a couple years ago when I was just starting this journey. I think I'd won a free session with you through a mutual friend who was an astrologer. And I had no idea what this was until you brought it to me. And I was like, so hooked. I think I downloaded the audiobook for it right away and I just started listening and listening. What are these gene keys? How can we use them? How can we apply them to our lives? And that book is like 55 hours long, by the way, just a heads up for people. It's not a little read, but it is so full of like the most consciousness expanding information you could ever imagine. And I just totally dove in. And then I think we've had 2 sessions in total. But yeah, I would really love to first for you to say hi and then to kind of tell the audience what are the gene keys and give a little overview of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yes.
And I'd forgotten that it was something you'd won all those years back. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And
Super
yes,
divine timing, right? Yeah. I was just like,
perfect.
yes.
Well, that's what I find. Even if you're listening to this now, I would say if when I speak to anybody about the gene keys, it just shows up at the right time. There's something going on that's piquing our curiosity. I mean, really everything shows up at the right time, but it's just something about it that can pique our curiosity. And the gene keys is a path of contemplation and reflection. And it's about looking into ourselves and looking at the lives we're living and looking at these journeys that we take in our lives. And one of the things that people really are drawn to the gene keys for is there's because they see the word purpose
Mm.
emerging from this chart that we look at. We'll bring up a copy of a chart in a moment. Actually, we'll bring up Rose's chart just so you can see that. And oh gosh, I think I just wrote Nicole instead of Rose on your chart. We'll talk about that later. um, and it's purpose. It's like, yeah, what's my purpose? What am I here for? We're in a time of transition, a time of change. Many people are feeling the old foundations falling away, and that means the foundations of their old lives and their old livelihood sometimes. And so it's like, all this confusion and all this change and evolution we're going through right now, what does this mean for me as an individual? And that's what the Gene Keys does. It draws upon ancient wisdom. It draws upon primarily the I Ching, which is, a couple of thousand years ago in China, and it was written down, and it was called the Book of Changes. And here, so now we have this kind of more modern transmission around it. And it also incorporates aspects of astrology, as you've mentioned. And it's this path of self-reflection, self-contemplation. And so when anybody comes to the Gene Keys, you can listen to this 55-hour book or read the 400-page book, and you can read it, every single page of it, and find something juicy in it, I'm sure. What happens when we approach it, most people, though, is they're kind of interested in looking at how does this unravel for me, especially because, you enter into this Gene Keys book and there's 64 Gene Keys. And it's like, well, which ones are relevant to me? And so when we return to the basics, we kind of create this chart for you. And actually, I think you just need to get me to share so I can share the screen there.
Oh, wait, how am I going to do that?
If you go to the share screen, there should be an arrow next to it, and then
Oh,
it.
no. If I go into like whiteboard, share screen. Oh, share screen, there's an arrow. And then I say multiple participants can share simultaneously.
That's right.
Oh my God, I'm learning things. Okay, here we go. There you
Cool.
go.
Perfect. And
Wow.
apologies, I wrote Nicole because I instead.
That's
Well,
okay. For the viewers that don't know, I did go by Nicole for most of my life up until about 3, 4 years ago. I can't even remember anymore. And I shifted my name. So now I'm Rose, but I was Nicole when you met me. Yeah.
and it might be interesting too to look at the date in which you changed your name if you have
Oh,
that down somewhere, because that's almost like a rebirth of sorts.
oh, I'm totally gonna find that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love working with people when they have these significant life changes and events because, as you can see here, we dropped this chart that's based upon your birth date here. So,
Mm,
your birth information there, and we'll just, everybody gets this chart,
mhm.
and the charts look pretty much the same, and you see all these numbers in them, and each of these numbers is a gene key. And we'll bring up your chart again in a few moments there. But each of these numbers is a gene key. And so there's a story within each of these gene keys. And one of the reasons, that I've come to love this just more and more deeply over the years is because when I've shared it with people who are interested, who are inquisitive, is there's just a deep resonance when they hear this. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like my life you're describing. I've had people kind of walk away from readings because it was too much. Like, how do you know all this, right? And it's not me per se. It's just that there is something divine about these in terms of the way it resonates for people. And so what we look at is we look at your particular birth chart, and there's these numbers and these different pathways, and there's a journey through them. And when we're working with it, it seemed like a lot because there's this book and there's these courses, and so invariably when people first encounter the gene keys, there can be this sense of like, where do I begin? There's a sense of overwhelm, confusion, and it's like, just start with your chart for one thing. There's a course called New to the Gene Keys, which is free for anybody to join in. So you can go and enter your information and begin that journey. And I'll make sure you've got the link for that, so to be able to share with people. So we've been in Gene Keys, we've been doing our best to kind of help herd people into it based upon years of experience of seeing people going through it and the challenges with it. But ultimately, you've heard me mention this word contemplation. This is a pathway of contemplation. It's a work of contemplation. And if we can return to that, you might actually end up throwing your book away because you can realize through the contemplation just your own experience. And many times when people hear the word contemplation, they think of thinking. I've got to think about this, right? And so there's an aspect of thinking. And there's also the emotional aspect. When we work with our gene keys, this is the other part, is that these traumas and experiences we've had in our lives, this is where people kind of get like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. You can see this, it's in your chart, where somebody goes through a certain kind of experience. And the more years that I've been working with this, the more I can look at these charts and be able to kind of, is there something like this that happened in your early childhood or in your teenage years? And it just zings for people. And so this contemplation is about approaching this with the spirit of inquiry. And so it does, as we inquire about these, and we'll give an example in a few moments so you can actually take you through it and just be like, oh, okay, is that sometimes these emotions are brought up and they're here for us to release, to move through. And every gene key, let's take an example right now, actually, just to work with something that's alive. And actually, I'm going to allow you, Rose, which one, if you were intuitively drawn to this, which number sort of jumps out at you as like, yeah, I'd love to explore that one a little bit more.
I would like to go down to purpose, the divine will there.
Bingo. There we go. And I think I can zoom in. Yeah. So if we look at this, I'll make it big for the screen. Oh, no, back a bit.
Back just a little bit.
Back a bit there. There we go. Yeah. So purpose. Yeah, this is the one that does draw people. And oftentimes when we hear the word purpose, people think that purpose is something that they do in their life. I'm here to write a book, create a movie, build a foundation, travel the world, whatever it might be. And purpose can be any of those things. There's any of those things on the physical plane can be part of our purpose. When we talk about the purpose, this is like an essence of our being. This is our being. It's about a beingness rather than a doingness. And that beingness feeds into our doingness. So, Rose, like myself, you've probably worked in different arenas in your life, and you've gone through, because I know you weren't always doing what you're doing now.
Nope.
Right?
And it's not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like on the outside, it's a different profession, it's different work. But, there's this, when we look at it, we can see there's this whole journey through this 40th gene key. And there's these 3 words that are associated with this 40th gene key. The shadow, which is kind of, the shadow is the part of ourselves that hides in the dark. We're here to shed light on the shadow. The shadow of the part is the part of ourselves that we don't necessarily understand. We don't necessarily like it very much when we see it. In fact, it's much easier to see it in others than it is to see it in ourselves most of the time. And so when we look at the shadow, it's like we might want to avoid it. We want to dance around it. We want to just focus on, bringing out our best, which is absolutely, that's what we're here to do. Well, really, if you can take anything away from all of this about the gene keys, is that the shadow contains a gift. And it is by looking into that shadow and what Jung called making the dark conscious, becoming, bringing that shadow to the light. In that shadow is the gift. So in the 40th gene key, and we'll explore what those words mean. Resolve is the gift. So every gene key has a shadow. In this case, it's exhaustion. It has a gift. In this case, it's resolve. And then it has what's known as a siddhi. And a siddhi is kind of like the most refined essence of the gene key. It's like if we had no fears, if our mind was just completely out of the way, then we would probably recognize this inside of ourselves in our daily lives. But that's not the case for most of us. So we get glimpses of the siddhis, right? We get glimpses of this experience. So you're kind of moving through the frequency band from the shadow, which is really driven by the fear, and then a gift, which is something we're here to express in the world. So your purpose is about expressing this gift of resolve, and not just here when we're working together. This could be in every area of your life, right? It can show up in your relationships. It can show up in your health and wellness. Definitely if it's the 40th gene key, very often I see that this is something for people that's rooted in health and wellness, and we can explore that a bit more in a moment. And so where I might approach somebody, even if you don't have the book, that's actually a really great thing when you're approaching this for the first time, because it's like you could go into the book and you could see what's said there, or you can approach this and look at, okay, exhaustion. So when you hear the word exhaustion, now that you're in a different profession in your life, maybe we can would you say that in your previous profession and your previous, did you experience exhaustion?
Yeah. And you know what? And I even now looking at this, because I haven't actually pulled my chart up for quite a while, I even see in the last couple of years where I still was in that exhaustion. I have this like workhorse mentality of like, if it's not hard, then I'm not working hard enough. So I'm like, how do I actually get away from this overworking? And I ended up closing my collective like a few months ago now. Well, it's since September, but after closing it, I went to get some work done, like some health work done. And he's like, your adrenals are shot. And I was like,
right.
Oh, I just literally exhausted everything that I had to workhorse this. And now I'm looking at things like, how do I work smarter, not harder, so that I'm not like physically or even time-wise exhausting my resources.
That's amazing. That's right there. You're just describing that shift through the shadow. You've seen, it's like, oh yeah, I don't want to be doing this. I want to, and the gift of resolve is what's emerging from this.
Yes.
So the exhaustion, that tends to be a word. It's like people hear that. It's like, oh yeah, I totally know what exhaustion is. And exhaustion doesn't have to be physical too. It could be mental exhaustion. It could be emotional exhaustion.
Yeah.
It's like exhaustion. We are exhausting some of the supplies of certain things on our planet. There's that kind of exhaustion too, overconsumption, and or putting, like you said, it's just like it's busy for the sake of being busy. It's whereas resolve, and here it could be that you're busy on the outside world. To somebody looking in, it's like, wow, she's busy, but it's like I see the gift of resolve as like that Energizer bunny. It's that you're so surrendered to what is in the moment, and you feel so aligned. This is the divine will in action. You can always look at that if we want to see how does the siddhi play into the gift is the siddhi in action in the world. So the siddhi we experience very internally. The gift is that expression in the world. So this is a key that is about all those things that you mentioned. When we look at resolve, it's looking at it. There's a bit of a warrior kind of culture to it that's needed, because it's like you got to cut away at the things that are taking your energy away from you, be it people or situations, and just being really aware of where you want to invest your energy. Because when you're invested in something that makes you come alive, you could do it for 17 hours a day and not get exhausted.
100%.
And so,
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. And I've even, the way that I worked before, doing one-on-one sessions forever, having the awareness, like if I work myself like that forever, it's going to be a hard ride for the next 25 years. So how do I get smarter? How do I evolve? How do I shift this? So like things like residual income come in, or I can help larger amounts of people and not have to, spend 17 hours a day doing it, but like do 2 hours a day and be able to show up daily and still have that because I innately have this ability that I want to serve. Like I do want to serve, but I don't want to overserve, and I don't want to serve until, in my previous life, I mean, a few years ago, I was a waitress. Like I literally served every day in every way. And now I'm like, I can do it smarter. I can do it in ways that are going to be more beneficial for me and other people.
yes. Yeah, exactly. So you're really listening to how that, yeah. And within the 40th gene key, it's interesting too, because it's like there's um it's such a coding around health. Like if we just succumb to that exhaustion, if we never look internally, like if you kept on that trajectory without listening internally, it's like the exhaustion shows up as all kinds of diseases in our body. So being able to take that time to be with it, to presence like that, it's really important for you to acknowledge, your boundaries in situations, and notice what sapping your energy, and just what brings you alive, that kind of thing. And you might try different things. You might I'm just going to bring it up one more time here. You'll see that it has a 0.3 here. So this is something that people will ask questions about as they're looking at their chart, is that suddenly there's this 40.3 and it says line 3 movement. And so this is, this line 3 adds a particular flavor to the 40th gene key. So somebody else might be a 40.1. And so you've got the same themes of exhaustion, resolve, and divine will, but it has a different place within your lived experience, if you will. And you'll see this here. Line 3 is related to blood. Right. So, if you were to exhaust yourselves through any lack of any kind of boundaries or things like that, you might notice something, in the health of your blood in some way.
I literally will go through waves of low iron. So if I'm in a wave of low iron, I physically feel exhausted, and I'm like, oh, I'm not taking care of myself. It literally will show up for that. And I went through like years of low iron here and then here. And it's like, for me, it does show up in the blood, which is like so incredibly crazy, but not crazy, right? Like it's like, that makes sense. That really does make sense for me. So I feel it in the body first. And that's why I have to be really disciplined and like showing up for myself consistently so that I can let the universe work through me. Otherwise, I'm just this vessel that's like, it's no use to nobody if I'm depleted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things I'll say too on that line 3 is that it, because this feels like it might be important for your own contemplations around it, even, is that whenever I see a line 3 in a chart, it's almost like this is the traveling gypsy kind of person. This is somebody, it's like if you're looking at how you're doing in life by comparing to others, you'll probably find yourself straddled in the shadow there more often than not, because the stability that you have in your life is not from being in one profession forever or being in one place. It's here, you're here to experience the highs and lows of life, and to really experience that through all that you do and all that you are. And so very often I know people who have this. I remember talking to one woman about this, and I used the description traveling gypsy, and she's like, I literally live in a trailer park, and she says, and I've got my wheels are still on because I'm like ready to go whenever. Like I'm not. And so, so the line 3, there's the balance between looking at that sense of inner stability versus measuring your stability based on what others are doing, but also commitment as well. It's like knowing when a commitment, you've worked in serving, you worked with your center, and recognizing, oh, okay, I've been committed to it so fully for this time, because overcommitment can lead to exhaustion.
Yes.
And the fear of commitment can lead to exhaustion too. So there's the different aspects of it. And so returning back to this contemplation piece, what I really encourage people is to look at these words and refer to the book and but more importantly is to allow these keys to come alive in your lived experience. And so you might inquire, it's like, okay, where does exhaustion still show up in my life? I might look to that, and we have 3 simple words in the Gene Keys: allow, accept, embrace. Allow, accept, embrace. Because somebody might look at that shadow and say exhaustion, like, oh yeah, no, I've sorted everything out, I'm good, and and that can be the intellect coming in. But if we go for the allow, it's like it's sort of allowing for the possibility. It doesn't mean I'm agreeing that there is that still there, but it's like, okay, if there is any, show me it. Show me where I'm still, out of alignment inside of myself that way, in ways that I'm exhausting myself. And so we're just allowing for that possibility. So it means that we approach this whole Gene Keys body of work and say, no, that's not me. That's the intellect saying, no, that's not me. Or, yeah, that's totally me. And it's also not limiting it to the book description of it. It's like you have the 40th Gene Key in your purpose, and so do thousands of other people, maybe millions, right? But it expresses to everybody in a very different way through the life that you're living. And so just because you and a friend have the 40th Gene Key as a purpose doesn't mean you're in the same profession, same work, that kind of thing. It can be completely different professions, completely different work. Quite often there are some, nice synchronicities that way, but it's just that keeping it. And so the allow is that, allow for that possibility. So if we were to pick another example of another shadow, seriousness, right?
That's a good one, because I'm actually my theme is like I want to have fun this year, where I'm like, if it's not fun, I don't want to do it, right? And it doesn't
Yes,
mean we can't do serious things, but we're not going to be this like doom and gloom. It's like, no. How do we raise this up?
absolutely. That's it. It's like, it's like somebody might look at themselves and say, yeah, I'm playful, I'm fun. I've noticed it. And it's not about not being playful and fun, because I'm playful and fun 60-70% of my time probably, and then there's 30% of my time where I could probably get really serious. And those areas where we get most serious are actually where we're most likely to have the biggest breakthroughs. So maybe I get most serious around finances, or maybe I get most serious around relationship, and it's like there's that clue to that in there. So the allowing is just like, I'm open to seeing it, and because the beauty of this is if we take a particular key and we begin to digest it and we begin to put our attention on it, they say, where attention goes, energy flows, right? And so if we begin to put our attention on it, we'll start noticing it. And so, as you saw, there's 11 Gene Keys in your chart. That's a lot of Gene Keys. And it's one of the reasons that patience is such a valuable asset to us on our journey through the Gene Keys, because so many of us come to it and there's this enthusiasm of like, oh my gosh, I want to understand this all right away. I'm guilty of this from 10 years ago when I began this. It's like, there's the book, let's just read all. But the Gene Keys wants us to savor it. We often think in the Gene Keys, we have this isn't a cup of tea, but imagine it's a cup of tea, right? We sip our cup of tea and we sip it slowly. And we're taking a word in, we're taking a concept in, and we're allowing it to unravel in our being and unravel it to depths that we may not have allowed ourselves to go with it before. Again, if we return to the word resolve, there might be a certain level of understanding around the word resolve, but to experience that resolve fully in your being, that's another depth of journey. And so one of the things that I would encourage people when you're coming into this is that take your time with it. It can be, you could look at it and you start to see, oh, there's this part in my chart that talks about my vocation, what I'm here to do. I want to go to that. And it it unravels in its own way over time, over contemplation. Like this is not a process that, if people want a quick fix, the Gene Keys isn't for you. But if you're open to just enjoying the journey, then you'll probably enjoy this, because that's exactly what this is. It's still unraveling for me. There's newer depths. It's like a spiral. Very often when we come to new bodies of work and we hear something that we might have heard elsewhere in another way, where it's like, or another common thing that I hear is like, oh, I've already worked on this issue in my life. And it's like, yes, and maybe we're going deeper with it. Maybe there's a deeper curve that we're following into this. Maybe there's something more that wants to kind of emerge through life, through you at this moment in time. And so it is something that this chart is something eventually we can let it go. And it's also something you don't have to be with it all the time. It can be in the background of your life and you can return to it when you feel the call, right? It could be, now we've had this conversation, the 40th gene key is alive in your awareness again. And then it's like, wow, okay, so this is my purpose. This is what I'm here to be and express in every moment. And, with these shadows, so going back to that seriousness, it's like, at first I was like, oh my God, I'm getting really serious here about whatever it might be, and like spiritual people, we can be some of the most serious people on the planet.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I must get to joy. I must get to joy. And it's like, oh, it's about seeing that seriousness, then I can begin to unravel. So, for instance, the 46 gene key, serious to delight. So that playful delight emerges when we hone in on that area of life where we get most serious and we can open up to it. So I know somebody, for instance, she has the 46 gene key, I think 3 times in her chart.
Wow.
And it's in a part of her chart that's related to prosperity. And part of her journey, she's a financial advisor. And so her thing is helping others become less serious about their finances. And it's an area of life many people get tightly wound up, expectations around. And so what a beautiful way for her to serve others that way after going through her own journey with that.
Well, I love that. I love that. And, I mean, there is like astrology obviously tied into this. And so it just reminds me, I'm just like, oh yes, like it's just so similar. And it, it's not something you do have to look daily at, but if it is there, then it gets you to like that deeper part of yourself where you're like, okay, why is this situation happening? Oh, what emotions are coming up? Are they my shadow? Are they my gifts? And how do I like elevate that? How do I get into the gifts? Because everyone has that opportunity. It's just, if you don't bring awareness to it, you may forever be floating on your shadow timeline, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's all it needs, is that presence. Which brings us the gene key at the top of your chart, which is known as your life's work, and that is what we're here to do. Yours is the city of presence. That's what self-assurance is. It's bringing awareness. Superficiality is the shadow. And the shadow is just like, I'm just going surface deep. I'm not really diving in here. But self-assurance is just this total trust in and allowing ourselves to be present to what is arising in this moment right here and now, and to cultivate the beauty within the shadow. Again, it's not like running for, it's like all those emotions that we can tend to run from guilt, for instance, is like guilt is actually, it shows up in my gene keys as what's called my core wound. And I used to feel guilt so often and just want to make it go away, got to make it go away. And when it arises in my being now, there's just such an awareness of the frequency of it. It's almost like, oh, there's guilt here. And then I'm sitting there and I'm just allowing myself to experience it. And at first, I may not want to accept that. It's like, I don't like this. But then in that acceptance of it, I come to, I'm no longer resisting it. I'm fully being into it. And then out of that, through the real embracing of that, just really fully embracing, okay, this guilt, it's here. whether it's personal, ancestral, whatever. I don't need the story around it necessarily. And what do I learn out of this? I've learned so much about forgiveness
Mm.
through guilt. I've learned about my own guilt and where I've needed to forgive myself and how I've been challenged to forgive myself. I've seen the guilt of others, and can I forgive them, even if they can't forgive themselves. So there's these beauty within these gifts. Shame is another one, right? It's like shame, we're hiding from those parts of ourselves that we don't feel good about, we feel shameful about. And when we come to embrace them, we can kind of have a chuckle about them, not in a way that's demeaning, self-demeaning, or demeaning of others, but there's a humor that can arise. Many comedians also struggle with shame, and humor is one way that they can learn to work with that. So there's these gifts within these shadows, and every shadow contains a gift. Every gene key, that shadow that you see there that you've spent your life running from, because most of us we're not given the tools to be present to it. There's such a blessing awaiting us when we do bring that presence. So yeah.
I'm like that. It's just so powerful. I'm getting so jazzed up. I'm like, I'm gonna be looking at my chart like soon to get off here again. But like even having hindsight, like looking back and just like seeing your journey within those gene keys, being like, okay, yeah, like 5 years ago I was here and now I'm here. And yeah, and I now recognize when I fall back here and because you don't fully just get out. You're not just like fully healed and you never experience those shadows again. It's like, how do you now approach them differently, knowing what you know with the growth that you've taken, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like I still experience guilt. I still experience shame, but I don't run from it like I used to. And it's not even a need to escape it. It's like when we let go of the need to escape the emotion, that's how we kind of move through them, right? It's like I'm not holding on to it unnecessarily, but I'm also not just trying to push it away. And this is where the spirit of grace, we hear the word grace a lot in the world of gene keys. And it's actually related to one of the gene keys, and it's a gene key that is in your chart. And it's just this spirit of grace, which in many ways for me is associated with the rose, interestingly enough.
Love it.
That we invoke, right? It's like grace meets us halfway. I'm acknowledging my suffering, my wounding, and then I'm surrendering that over to allow for that grace to move through. So there's been experiences where I didn't see a way out, where I simply was asked to meet the shadow within, to acknowledge where I was feeling a fear or where I was experiencing myself as a victim of something, to be able to sink deep into that and just, oh, okay, there, I'm touching it, I'm accepting it. Now, Grace, I'm handing this over to you. And so it is, yeah. And so the things that used to be just knock me out for days can move through in a few hours sometimes. And sometimes it's a bit longer, but it's like okay, there's something arising out of this. There could be a creativity that emerges. And, it's different for each of us. And like you said, looking at your chart, for a lot of people, it's a confirmation of the path they've been walking their whole life. And a confirmation sometimes of the gifts that they've always recognized in themselves. And sometimes, that if that's the purpose it serves, then that's fantastic, because it just helps in that self-affirmation in that way. And then for others, it's, they never even thought they had gifts. And here's this whole profile just showing and revealing, this uniqueness. And it's really important to recognize that I am not my profile. I'm not these gene keys. These are like, this was an alignment that was taking place at the moment of my birth. And in my own expression throughout my life, I'm moving through this. I'm working through these are archetypes. These are 64 different archetypes. And, people can relate to the archetypal wizard, for instance, or witch, and the archetypal journey that they move through. These gene keys are that same kind of thing. It's this archetypal journey that we move through. And so, yeah, it's being able to look back on our life and seeing where one of the things I would say is that unlike astrology, it's not making it doesn't point out what's coming in the cycles ahead for us, which is where I think astrology and this can be mutually beneficial to one another in that sense. So it's more of looking, and when you look at your profile, it's not predicting anything that's coming in your future or what jobs you should do or anything like that, but it's like wherever you are, you know, what gifts are you being called to cultivate in this space right here, right now? You know, our purpose isn't something that I align with when I quit this job and move into a new job. I align with my purpose now, and then that unfolds these unexpected things in our life that can align us with our work that we're here to do.
Mhm. I just had this like beautiful vision, like each gene key is like a closed lotus. And it's like our job to like feed it, nurture it, and then it opens. And before we know it, we've got a little bit of a garden going on. Now we're attracting bees to us, opportunity, honey's now being produced from it. I can see that like unfolding. And you know, some people might live their whole life and none of their flowers bloom because they weren't given the tools or the resources or decided they wanted to do any better than maybe the generational trauma they had prior to. And that's okay. But now with this great awakening, it's kind of like everyone is having the awareness of like, oh my God, there's flowers here and I need to tend to them. And, you know, it'll make life so much more pleasant if I do. And it's okay if they don't all open up this lifetime. But, you know, it really is dependent on how much work you want to put into yourself. Like this is a direct reflection of how much time do you want to spend contemplating or how much time do you want to do the 9 to 5 grind or just Netflix and chill your life away. I keep saying that. It's really dependent on how much you want to show up for yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I still enjoy Netflix from time to time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Listen, we're still human. We can still enjoy a
Yeah,
good
we are.
show.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about the gene keys as well is that, you know, the more we deepen into it, the ordinary, the more extraordinary we experience life.
Mm-hmm.
So Gene Keys is about meeting us in life right where we're at in our relationship challenges. You know, it's saying enlightenment waits for us through the relationship challenges, not by running off to a mountaintop and meditating. That's a path for some, but for many of us in this world, this is where we've ended up. This is what you know, we have these desires for relationships. Those desires aren't wrong, right? It's like there's something that's leading us down a pathway there, and these gene keys can kind of give us a flavor of that. And you know, it's like suddenly now, you know, my love of the gene keys, what I love seeing in the communities in the world as they work with the gene keys is that where once, you know, there was this seeking to leave the planet in order to experience like the bliss, is being able to ground that here and now. This idea of heaven on earth or Avalon or Eden or whatever it might be for somebody, where it's that, you know, once we begin to change our perceptions about what's unfolding in our lives, then that, you know, we begin to see that in the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly the ordinary, that's why they say before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
So
people have been saying that to me so often. And you know what you're saying is like it's like activating the kingdom within. It's like how do you just become heaven? How do you just activate that
yes.
kingdom where you're not looking for it externally, but you could be plopped anywhere and you could still experience the most amazing experience because you're looking to reflect internally. And anytime externally it's not what you are enjoying, you're like, okay, I got to go back to the whiteboard here. And the whiteboard is you. So like, what are you doing to shift that outer reality? And this brings us to a really good point because the gene keys I know also can really apply to like what's going on in the collective, the human collective. So I know that there's gene keys, they kind of, I don't know how often they shift and change where we go from one to the next, but do you want to maybe talk about where we were last year maybe, and then where we're going, kind of like what are the themes for 2024 through the gene keys?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big question
I know it's
too.
big. I guess hone it in. Maybe it's too big. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can bring it into a weekly basis, for
Okay.
instance. We can start with the weekly and then you can sort of mountain it there. One of the things that exists within the Gene Keys is something known as the freedom prophecy. Because from the year 2027 onwards, the collective is going to be exposed to the 55th gene key, which moves from the shadow of victimization to the gift of freedom. And in fact, it's the only gene key which has freedom is the gift and freedom is the city. It's the same word for both. And so it carries this transmission about what is the potential from this year 2027 onwards. And of course, it's a potential. Like any prophecy is a potential. It depends on how we respond to it as a collective. But you can think of it as like this background frequency. Every week, every 6 days, we move through what's known as a pulse. And that means moving through one of the 64 gene keys. So at this very moment, we are in a pulse. The gene key is the 38th gene key. And don't worry too much about the numbers. Listen to the words when I share them, because there are 64 numbers and even the best of us can forget what those numbers mean from time to time. So, but this is about, it gives us a reference point, if you like. In the 38th gene key, the shadow theme is struggle.
Mm.
The gift is perseverance. And the city is honor. So for 6 days, beginning at the very beginning of the new year, this is the pulse. This is the gene key that is like the background frequency for everybody. That doesn't mean that we're all going to struggle or we're all going to be persevering, or it doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be a theme directly in our life, but we might be able to notice it in the world. We might be able to notice it. You definitely notice if you turn on the news headlines. Like if you want to see the shadows and the pulses quickly, you just go to the news because that'll give you the
Yeah.
shadows and the pulses. And the 38th gene key is about war. It's about violence. It's about hostility and aggression. That's what struggle is. It's like all this energy that we could be transmuting within ourselves. We're looking to get rid of it and blaming somebody else for it. So that's where so much of the wars and violence can stem from. On a personal level, it's like a lack of purpose. I don't feel any purpose. So instead of standing for something that I really believe in, I'm going to fight against the old, or I'm going to fight against this person just so I can release that pent up energy inside of me. Right. And so people might have experienced that. It's also interesting. We talk about the new year and so the new year always takes place in this particular gene key. This is when people are setting New Year's resolutions, right? And so straight off the bat, is it like, are you making a stand for something that you are for, or are you making a stand against something? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, so for instance, I worked as a personal trainer for 10 years, so I would always hear New Year's resolutions. And what most often I heard was a struggle against weight.
Mm.
I wasn't hearing people coming and saying, I just want to have good health. I want to feel fit. And, those kinds of things. It was like, I want to lose 10 pounds. So it was like the focus was on the struggle. That doesn't mean that, it's like when I stand for something, it just means that those obstacles seem a lot smaller now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, like, so for me, when I'm going and working out, it's like I'm focused on what I'm there for. And then it's like you might notice, oh, yeah, I lost a few pounds there, but it wasn't, I wasn't fighting against that the whole time. And so, what that's an example of this is a background pulse that's affecting us all. And so we go through all 64 themes in a year. But then we have all these other planets, as you know, in astrology, right? That's just the sun. So basically, when we say a pulse, it means the sun is sitting in the part of the sky that is associated with the 38th gene key.
Mm.
Now, the moon is somewhere else. Earth is in another gene key. Jupiter, Mars, they're all playing some kind of theme there. And so you've got all it's really fascinating to watch. So somebody, for instance, who has the 38th gene key in their chart, this might be a particularly challenging week for them because the sun is associated with a key that's in their profile. Struggle is a theme for them, and it's like it gets illuminated more
Yeah.
so at this because the sun illuminates things. It illuminates what's still in the shadow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
I like love that so much. And talking about like what are you focusing on? It's either you can, focus on the positive and come from it from a place of empowerment, or you focus it on the negative and you're disempowering yourself, being like, okay, I'm literally coming through the shadow. Whereas you could just step into like, I'm actually here to make shifts, make changes, and not be the victim in the story. So I love that. And I mean, it makes sense in the fact that that is the theme around every, calendar new year, because it's not astrologically the new year, but every calendar new year, that everyone is like kind of forced into this, like, what resolution are you making? Like, what are you doing to better yourself? Because you're not perfect in this moment. What can you do to get better? And if we looked at it more on like, I always want to do better. So I'm constantly looking into ways to heal and help and grow and evolve, not to lose and look at struggle. And it's just like, no, I just want to keep doing better and better and better. So I love that you bring that up, because I know a lot of people are going to feel that. And then we probably also go through this moment of so many people aren't able to stay consistent or accomplish those goals. And then we move into guilt and shame, right? Like it's this
yes. Yeah,
wave, like, boom. Yeah.
and then you get more of the struggle, don't you? And the word perseverance, like perseverance acknowledges that there's still struggle in life, but the difference is at the shadow, I'm suffering as a result of that struggle. I feel guilty, I feel shame, I feel this, right? Whereas like I said before, it's almost like the obstacles become a challenge for that person with they're not a victim of these obstacles or these blocks or these emotions or whatever they might be. It's like, okay, I'm heading there and this is showing up right now. So obviously this is what's, what was I saw yesterday? It was Marcus Aurelius quote, and I think it's like what stands in the way is the way, right? So it's like when those, so it's not about not having obstacles in our life, but it's our attitude and how we meet those obstacles. So perseverance and struggle both involve struggle, but it's the approach to that struggle, right? And and so that's the same with every gene key in a way, like exhaustion and resolve. It's the same energy, but at a different frequency. So, at the shadow frequency, you can be doing work and work and work, and you're just exhausted because there's no inner alignment. You're doing things that you don't want to do. You're doing things because there's a fear of not enough, or there's a fear of something or other underneath. Whereas at the gift frequency, it's like you're still doing a lot on the surface, but there's that you fully accepted and embraced and respected those other emotional components. So it's like, it's not like it's not banishing these things from ourselves. It's really integrating them, making them conscious, becoming aware of, like I said, like fear too. That's another one. It's like the fear that we feel. It's like, can I fully feel into that? Because then it's like, oh, then I catch myself thinking something that I've thought since birth that was no longer true. But I'm still holding on to that thought or that feeling. So, yeah. There's a bit of a warrior spirit that comes through that perseverance, and maybe that's why we're talking about it now. Because I know that when this comes out, we won't be in that pulse
Oh
anymore.
yeah, that's totally true. Yeah. But then people can have the hindsight to be like, oh yeah, I definitely was dealing with that 2-3 weeks ago. And
Yeah.
so do they have a specific kind of gene key for the entire year, or like a theme for the year where we will be experiencing that unfolding over a really large amount of time?
There's certain keys. I mean, if you think of it in terms of astrology, you'll get certain keys which have a longer or span of time, like Saturn and Pluto and Neptune. Like Pluto always feels like a big one because that's a planet of transformation.
Yeah, and that's just shifting in the next couple of weeks. So what is the gene key associated with that? Do you know?
I believe that it's going to be shifting. I think I noticed this the other day. I knew it was going to be happening soon. I believe it shifts into the 41st gene key, which is all about new beginnings. And it's interesting because the time that this comes out, I have a feeling that the sun will be in the 41st gene key as well. So it's going to be really interesting maybe we can watch it and see what we're saying at the moment when things are unraveling, because the 41st gene key is about the beginnings of things. And in fact, in the I Ching year, which is a cycle of a year, the cyclic new year begins in the 41st gene key. So it's around January the 22nd, right? It's about that time. And so it's interesting, the sun and Pluto will both be there. Now, I might have to double check. I'm pretty sure that's what we're moving into next, is this 41st. But the key that Pluto is in, and for people who are interested, there are ways to find out what are called the transits. And you'll find that less in gene keys than you would in the human design system. A lot of people have come across human design and gene keys, or one or the other, and they look very similar in ways, because they are related in a way, in a big way. But they're also different in a number of ways too. So they are complementary, and they're both big transmissions. So if somebody really loves the astrology piece, you can get these transits and you can see where the moon is. I'll just show it on my screen here so you can kind of, not that it'll make any sense to most people, unless for you it probably will, because you'll know the symbols. But it's like so the current transits, you've got that chart, which doesn't make as much sense. But then along the side here, I've got all the transits of the planets.
Yeah.
Right now, it's interesting, actually, because the moon is the 28th gene key, which is the shadow of purposelessness. And so here we are. This might be why we've been talking about this in this moment, because it forms a pairing with the 38th gene key, which is where the sun is. And they form a channel called the channel of struggle. It's like, what are we struggling for? I think so in this moment in time, as we're recording this, it's like, it seems like a very relatable message. It's like, what are the visions in life that you are standing for? Now, in 2 weeks' time, I'm sure it'll still be relevant. But like you said, we'll be looking back at it in hindsight. But yeah, the moon, Pluto, they all cycle through these different gene keys, and they have a different flavor to them. So an overarching one for the year, there isn't necessarily, but even just taking it, there is a magic to numbers. And so if I look at the year, it's 2024, right? So the 20th gene key, for one, as 2024. 20th gene key is playing quite an influence throughout this millennia. And the 24 is a gene key. And it's like, if you look at those, it's like, maybe that'll speak to it for you in some way. And it's about creation. It's about inventiveness. It's about really allowing ourselves to cut through our addictions. So this could be a great year to be like, what are the addictions that we're still succumbing to? And what is that addiction trying to fill? What hole is that addiction trying to fill? And humans, we're all addicted to something, just some of them are more subtle addictions than others. And so it's not so much, about just, again, moving straight to the creativity, but what's my addiction? Like, what are the addictions that I have? What are the things I can't do without, because it seems to be filling some kind of hole for me?
Yeah. And instantly I was like, okay, what are, even, if I'm looking at across the board, so people that are awake, people that are going into their healing, people that are healed, or people that are healers, an overarching theme of addiction would be like over identification with some sort of role that you take on, whether it's the healer, or whether it's a mom, whether it's the worker, whether it's like this thing. And it's like, how do you unravel from that and get back to that realization that you are the multidimensional soul choosing this experience? And that will bring us to that awakening, like seeing it within self of like, I'm a soul awakening, and yes, I'm having this experience, but it's not me, right? It might kind of lead me into a specific life, but it doesn't dictate who I am unless I allow it to. And it's like being able to kind of separate ourselves from the stories and those labels that humans love so much.
Exactly. Yeah. There's another part of the Gene Keys. We haven't talked about it too much, but it's kind of like the part that I'm sort of watching over for the Gene Keys organization, and it's a transmission called the Dream Arc.
Hmm.
And the Dream Arc is related to the Gene Keys in many ways, except instead of numbers, we're working with creatures. So if you're somebody who finds all this number talk is too much, like my wife, for instance, she's known about the Gene Keys for 10 years, never really dived in. But the Dream Arc is waking up uh, something different for her because it's relatable to her in a different way. And so the dream arc is, as the name suggests, it's about our dreams, dreaming at night, dreaming in the day. We are the dreamer, we're the one being dreamed. And these creature guides that connect us to, that connect us to these deep messages. And so as you were talking just then, it was making me think the fish, there's a fish associated with the 24th gene key, and it's the flying fish.
Hmm.
And the flying fish is here to help us support us move through our fear of freedom. And so we cling to those identities because there is a sense of security around them. But actually, we don't know if freedom is on the other side of it. And it's like, wow, what if there's that, actually, it's not fear of freedom. Sorry, it's a fear of not being free.
Hmm.
That's the thing. So it's a fear of not being free. Apologies there, but it's like these creatures. If the numbers are just too much for people, sometimes approaching it through the creatures, it's the same wisdom. And it's amazing when people start working with it, they have encounters that they just never imagined. A friend of mine was just in Egypt, and he was in the Temple of Horus there, and he'd done a ceremony with a group of people. And then he went back to, I think it was his hotel room or place that he was staying, and something caught his attention outside, and he went and opened the curtain, and there was a falcon sitting there chowing down on some food. And rather than flying away, they just locked eyes for about 2 or 3 minutes. And he showed me video footage of it. And it turns out that the falcon is associated with Horus,
Yeah.
the mythology of Horus. So he was able to make this connection there through this. And it really like blew his whole mind.
Mhm.
And just that's what I hear about in the dream arc as well. So we're not working with a two-dimensional profile in that sense, which is one source of this wisdom. This is more of a right brain approach that's about like interacting with life as it shows up in the moment. And so he was able to refer to the falcon and see, oh yeah, this is what the falcon's about. I wonder how it can, how's this medicine serving me at this time?
Yeah.
And it has the
Yeah.
cheeky wisdom built into it still.
Well, and I love that because I do see people coming in at all different like phases and stages of their awakening. So they might be super overwhelmed. And it's like if we can make this more fun and more tangible. And
Mhm.
also I like the interactive part because I often do say like, what is the universe telling you? What are the signs? What are the things that are showing up for you? Because it's trying to speak to you in all moments. But if you aren't contemplating or you're not aware, you'll miss them. So
Yeah.
I love that. I know we're hitting about an hour here. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to see, I knew we were going to be able to talk. It'd be super easy. But I just want to say, like, do you have any offerings coming up? And then also, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think this is, there's a timing here around people who are interested in taking this further. The New to the Gene Keys course is free. So I'll make sure you've got the links for all these that I'm saying here. So there's the New to the Gene Keys, which is a free course, and it's just a few days long, like 2 or 3 days, and you just dip into it for a few minutes here and there, and you can begin to get an introduction to what the Gene Keys is about. So some of what I shared, you'll hear it in a different light from Richard Rudd, who's the originator. He was the first student. We don't like to say there's experts for saying the Gene Keys because we're all students, including him. We're all students expressing this wisdom in our own unique ways. And so New to the Gene Keys is a great place. And beginning in February, we're actually launching an online retreat. And that's something that the Gene Keys does really well, I have to say. That we pull together typically 1,500 to 2,000 people, and we go on this online journey for 3 months. And this one is focused on what's called the activation sequence. And if I was just to pull up your chart very quickly here again, is that the activation sequence is these 4 prime gifts. It's the 4 green circles here. And so it's not the whole of the chart, but that's 3 months where you're spending just looking at those 4 and the depth and the synchronicities and the, the what can come out of that is quite amazing. So if you're wanting to approach this in, I don't want to say the right way, but if you want to approach it in the way that's like very supportive of this whole process, I would encourage that. And again, it's like we're only covering 4 of them, but it just unlocks so much. It's called the activation sequence for a reason.
Yeah.
And so that's an offering that's coming up. And it says a 3-month retreat. Quite often, I think they're really a good price. I think it's $350, I think, or something like that. And that, there's webinars and there's community calls and there's different ways that you're supported during that 3 months. And even just being part of the container of all these people doing it together, I love doing, I'll be doing it again because I love doing it in these different fields because there's always something new arising from my own experience in that way. So I'd love to mention that, and I can share that link for you with that because that's just because it's coming up soon, February the 16th, I believe. So even at the time this comes out, people will have time to register for it. Yeah, and the link's there. And for people who want to contact me directly, then the easiest way, my website is matthewashdown.ca, and 2 T's in Matthew.
Yeah. And you do like one-on-one personal readings still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I love doing one-on-one readings. It'd be kind of like what we did here is just like, I kind of bring it, it's your own wisdom that you're connecting to. And I'm here to ask questions and sort of bring it alive, based on my grounding in it over the years. And so, yeah, you find your own way through it, but I can be that reflection of, and be able to, like we did today to an extent, just looking at certain things that show up in your life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay. And so I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers and thank you so much for showing up and all of your support. And remember that you can only perceive that which you are. So raise your vibes. Have a great day, guys.